Thank you, Amanda, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, for VinFast, very much for inviting us, and it's an honor to open the day. Thank you also for painting your flagship model BCG green. We really appreciate the free marketing. My name is Andre. I'm a partner in Singapore, and I lead our mobility offering and the Center for Mobility Innovation in Asia Pacific. So today I'm going to be taking you through our perspective and our global research, how we see the future of mobility evolving and what are the general mega trends affecting and changing the game in mobility. And I want to start just with, every good consultant would do, with a market perspective. And what we see overall is that the car sales market is back. Right? We've seen the chip crisis, the COVID impact around 2019 with a dip, but we are back to growth, and the growth is continuing. Of course, it's slowing down at some point where we reach the peak, but there is another important message of the slide, and this is that the growth is also shifting in terms of the powertrain. The powertrain of the future is electric, and the forecasts are being adopted every year in terms of the trajectory and the speed of growth. But one important fact is that by 2030, we will have the electrified powertrains on par with ICE, and then after that overtake them. Right? The future is electric, and there are other reasons for this development. One is particularly when we look into the economy. So you see that the big economies like United States and Europe actually already having reached their peak in car sales. Europe, because of regulation, we believe, will be very strongly still driving towards electrification. But then where is the growth coming from? The growth is coming from here, from this region, from Asia. Economies like India, very, very interesting, very important to look into, where the growth is just skyrocketing. And then, of course, Southeast Asia. Now, who is the fastest growing market in Southeast Asia? This is Vietnam. And Vietnam has an advantage also in terms of electrification, because more than a quarter of cars sold today are already being battery electric vehicles. And that growth will continue. But there are also other shifts coming our way. There are shifts in terms of technology. So we spoke about the rise of electric vehicles, but also the topic of autonomous driving. And some of you had the privilege to sit in the car. Some of us have had the privilege to look into the demonstration of the autonomous driving already happening and being tested in the real estate, in the VinFast ecosystem. There is also the shift in consumers. The consumers are not all asking to have a car, they are asking for mobility. So new mobility modes and new ways to own a vehicle are evolving. It's not only, the car is not only a status symbol, but it's also a means to reach the basic services like education, like healthcare, and participate in a fuller and better life. There is also the competitive dynamics, new entrants like VinFast, of course, and new companies who are thinking partly about digital first and software first for the vehicle. And we will talk about how that impacts actually the advantages and in the markets going forward. There is, of course, the regulatory environment, and this is constantly changing, but we see many nations already starting to ban combustion engine vehicles, others going back on their bans, and that will impact, how the electric vehicles will grow. But one fact is clear: the total cost of ownership of those vehicles, independent of the regulation, is becoming more and more attractive and overtaking the combustion engine vehicles globally. And then finally, of course, we couldn't disregard the global developments, the geopolitical developments, and we as BCG are spending a lot of time to help our clients navigate the changes in the geopolitics, in the tariff situation, in the trade situation, the trade flows, and in how the supply chains are being impacted and shifted. Now that leads us, we talked about the electric vehicle trend, to the other trends we're going to talk about today. First one being shared, so new ways of owning and participating in mobility where you don't necessarily need to own a car to be able to move from A to B. So on-demand services are increasing in share, and you will see there's a little light green area which is called robotaxi, of course taking the driver out of the vehicle and providing seamless autonomous services will become part of the reality. But we see more and more, of course, also the active mobility becoming an interesting way for people to move around. Software-defined vehicles. I spoke about it earlier, and we will talk more in detail about how software first and rethinking the technology in the vehicle, which is not necessarily responsible for the driving, but for your experience in the car, is changing. And you will see that software is the fastest growing component, and more vehicles have additional capabilities in terms of having an operating system, computing power, and a data platform. Then autonomy as a standalone topic, where we believe that more and more cities will rely on cars without the drivers. You see in many geographies actually becoming a driver is not something the new generation aspires to, but it's also something which contributes to bringing more people into mobility who were not able to participate. Mobility impaired people, elderly people, a lot of advantage of autonomous beyond just the cost saving which it can bring. And finally, the future is urban. We know about new urban developments. So mobility is becoming more and more urban game. Of course, you have the intercity mobility, but most important to solve, how do we move in cities and how do cities operate different modes? So let's dive into the topic of shared mobility. And on this chart, you see basically what does it cost you to drive or walk or ride a kilometer, and what is the duration where you would actually need to commit to. And I would say, would we see this chart 10 years ago, you would have the things on the left-hand side on the right-hand side, right? We all know about operational leasing for 3 years. I come from Germany. This is actually the highest type of how we own a car. We don't buy cars, we lease them, right? Or our company leases them. Walking is also well known. Now, what is starting to fill the gap is in the middle, right? Things like subscription models, things like owning the car on a timeshare are becoming more and more interesting. And when the cost comes in, the robotaxi becomes extremely interesting in the scenario, because it allows you to be flexible, but also allows you to be flexible at an affordable price. Now, when we talk about the experience, the topic of software-defined vehicles is very important because it gives you a very new experience being in the vehicle, right? Vehicle intelligence supporting you with the decisions. I actually had a conversation just at lunch, where I learned something new, where there are now models combining the voice assistant with gestures, so that you can point at a window and it goes down just to say, open the window. Thank you, Edmund. The usage of the ecosystem, bringing in the payment services, bringing in navigation, streaming, you name it, something which you're used to on your phone becoming now part of your vehicle experience. The topic of bionic interior, so man and machine becoming one. Suppliers spending a lot of time on understanding how do you actually combine gestures, voice, touch, and make the vehicle understand yourself. Shared mobility, autonomous driving, electric vehicles demanding for more computing power. That all leads us to the point where the vehicles need to become smarter, right? Which means more operations per second. And to become smarter, they also will need more power. right? More energy. And this is where the topic of software-defined vehicles and zonal architecture comes in. Okay, complex chart. Let me take a moment here to explain. So, if you sit in a vehicle 10 years ago, each of the items in the vehicle would have its own electronic compute unit, ECU, right? The bottom part. So, your cluster display has its own electronic compute unit. Your radio has its own electronic compute unit. Your uh, AC has its own electronic compute unit. Your components for the drivetrain have its own electronic compute unit. You have many small computers coming together and working together. That's a lot of power which you need. And those computers are not particularly smart, right? So we talk about uh, the trillion operations per second, so-called TOPS, you see. So now we're moving to where we can bring those computing procedures into more smarter domain controllers, right? Into domain architectures which are responsible for different zones in the vehicle. So you have now one smarter computer responsible for all your in-cabin experience. How do you operate your AC? How does the AC communicate with your sensors? How do you show it on the information system for the driver and so on, right? Then it starts to even go further with a cross-domain architecture where maybe you combine your infotainment with your advanced driving assistance systems, right? So that you say, I want to go towards a level 2 architecture where I have, or level 2 plus, where the vehicle at times can take over functions. It can navigate a highway, it can change lanes, and I want to have it visualized. That goes together into one more powerful computer. And as we go and combine the infotainment, your experience in the vehicle with the driving functions and go towards autonomy, those computing units start to merge and develop. And this is what we see on this picture. So basically, the zonal architecture with central SoC stands for software on the chip, controlling some of the domain electronic computing units is very advantaged because you can streamline your electronic architecture. You can save energy because you need less power than if you would power all these different high computing units. You can scale the solutions, and this is where the journey is going. Now, it's not a topic in the future. Already manufacturers, like premium manufacturers like BMW, are shifting to this, and you have seen deals in the market. Now, I remember I'm talking to investors, Volkswagen investing in Xiaopeng, Volkswagen investing into Rivian in the public domain. Why? These are software-first companies which develop the domain architecture and bring this capability and this technology stack to the traditional manufacturers which need to catch up. So you see new companies now starting to dominate where they start thinking about this first, right? Both on the western and eastern side. Now, as we get this technological advantage, we're moving towards autonomous driving, and we believe, you see this picture basically with the more green it gets, the more autonomous it gets. Let me put it this way. We see in the future still the level 2 plus, so the car takes over certain operations, but you still have to pay attention. And level 3, where for the moments you can disengage as a driver, but you will have to take over at some point, being predominant, particularly in the private vehicles. You'll see the level 4, which here is at about 1% with urban and I think 2%. So in total, let's say it's 3 to 4% as a very small share. Why is the share so small? Because this will happen more in urban developments. And so don't let yourself be discouraged, because you will see on the next page that we believe that about 60 to 160 cities will have robotaxis by 2035. It's a very broad range. Why is it so broad? Because depends a lot on regulation. It depends a lot on the ability to deploy and enter cities. The technology stack is developing faster than the actual ability of cities to say, I will allow robotaxis operate on my streets. I'm sure that it's safe. And this is again where closed residential areas have an advantage, because they can say, I can actually operate on my own when I let the robo shuttles drive and enable the mobility. Also developments where you would have different resident services, let's say healthcare, education, places to work, places for recreation, connected in one development, and enable this mobility also for people who cannot drive on their own, will have an advantage in adopting autonomous. So this is something we released this year in our work with the World Economic Forum, to say, like, what are the different adoption scenarios, what are also the expected numbers of robotaxis. And I think by 2040, if we look towards 6.7 million robotaxis, it's not a small number. Right? But in the global share, of course, still in a single-digit percentage level. Now, when we take a step even further, how does the city of the future look like? And this is where the mobility modes start to merge, right? Where your experience is starting to become, how do I get from A to B the fastest and in the most economical way? And the cities are starting to really very strongly think about this, both in terms of simulation. So we're working with a lot of cities to create digital twins and simulate the mobility of the future, how the different modes merge together, where should they lay out for more public transport, metros, where can they deploy autonomous vehicles with the best case in terms of the adoption, but also how can they repurpose some of the public space. Examples like Singapore, but also Paris, have implemented parts of this future vision system. And we hope that in the future more and more cities will have majority of these elements, be it the micromobility solutions, the autonomous driving solutions, the integration of public transport with active mobility, and also the specific opportunities for electric vehicles to seamlessly charge and be maintained. So I want to leave you for the rest of the day with some of the questions, knowing that we have investors in the room, we have practitioners in the room. I think the more we talk about this region and the particular opportunities here, we should start thinking about, out of these megatrends, what will be the specific business model which will capture the most benefits in Southeast Asia? How do players need to change? And what do players need to do to participate in these changes and maybe even shape these changes going forward? We're not alone in this game, and nobody can win this game alone. So everybody will need partners. What kind of partners are needed? And partners both on the operational side, but also on the financial side of the business. Which regulatory changes will be required, and how can they be collectively shaped? Maybe how can we offer support to regulators, which are often seeking for input from industry and from investors, to make this future of mobility, which is more inclusive, clean, and safe, happen in the future. And then finally, for yourself, is what's the best way to participate in this game? With that, I don't know if we have time for questions. I couldn't keep the time, but I hope I rushed through quick enough to leave some space for the questions. It's a good question. I would leave it to Chiem, because our estimations are a bit, I'm more on the conservative side. So look, we are at about 26% of EVs sold this year. You have to consider, of course, for the peak petroleum, the installed base, right? So we're gradually changing. So I think we'll start looking more towards 2035. Even you will see more EVs being sold earlier, but you still need to change your installed base, which is like at about 12-year lifetime, right? So 2035 more out of the air, but don't hold me accountable to that, right?